When he turned 18, his stepmother threw him out with nothing but a key to a worthless milk house. But what he found there wasn't just a building, it was a choice that would redefine his life. If you've ever felt like you've been left with nothing, or that the world has already decided who you are, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. It's for anyone who's ever had to find their own way home. The door clicked shut behind me with the sound of a well-oiled machine. Precise. Final. Brenda didn't slam it. She wasn't the type for overt theatrics. Her cruelty was a quieter, more administrative thing. It lived in the crisp folds of paperwork, the calm finality of her tone, the way she could divest herself of a person as if closing out a forgotten bank account. I stood on the porch, the same porch my father had carried her over the threshold of 12 years ago. Now she was ejecting me from it on the very morning I became a legal adult. The air was cold for May, a damp chill that seeped through my thin hoodie. I had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the $74 I'd scraped together from odd jobs. And I had the box. She had placed it on the hall table, next to a vase of offensively cheerful tulips. "This is what's left," she'd said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't sad, it was just a statement of fact, as if she were reading an inventory list. "Your grandfather's effects. The lawyers said they had to be transferred to you on your 18th birthday. Legally, they're yours." She pushed it toward me. It was a simple cardboard banker's box, sealed with yellowing tape. It felt impossibly light. For a moment, a stupid, childish part of me hoped it was a trick. That inside would be a real gift, a peace offering, a note that said, "Of course you can stay." But I knew Brenda better than that. I walked down the driveway, each step feeling loud and clumsy on the gravel. I didn't look back. Looking back would have felt like asking for something, and I was done asking. The sky was the color of a dirty pearl, a flat, uniform gray that promised a miserable, drizzling day. 2 years. 2 years since my dad's heart had given out, leaving me in this house as the sole, inconvenient reminder of his first life. Brenda had tolerated me with the sort of strained patience one affords a visiting relative who has long overstayed their welcome. My existence was a logistical problem she was finally, efficiently, solving. I reached the sidewalk and finally stopped, placing the box down on the damp concrete. My hands were shaking, less from the cold and more from the sheer, buzzing vacancy of the future. I was 18. I was free. I was homeless. I sat on a bus stop bench a few blocks away, the plastic slick with morning dew. People drove by on their way to work, warm and secure in their metal shells, their lives neatly contained. I was outside of all that. I took a deep breath and pulled at the tape on the box. It tore with a dry, papery sound. Inside, it was mostly air. There was a small, tarnished silver picture frame holding a faded photo of a woman I vaguely recognized as my grandmother, who died before I was born. There was a pocket watch that didn't tick, and at the bottom, there was a large manila envelope. My name, Leo Vance, was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. I opened the flap. Inside was a single, heavy iron key. It was ornate, the head of it shaped like a stylized letter V. With it was a folded sheaf of documents. I unfolded them. It was a deed, a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of a property described as Lot 7B, the structure commonly known as the Milk House on the former Vance family farmstead. The Milk House. I had a dim, fragmented memory of it. A small stone building set apart from the main farmhouse, where my grandfather used to store cans of milk to keep them cool before the truck came. I remembered the cold, damp smell of it, the way the stone seemed to sweat even on hot days. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. My grandfather, A man I recalled mostly as a smell of earth and pipe tobacco and the feel of a calloused, gentle hand, had died not long after. The farm itself had been sold off years ago to pay for debts I never understood. Brenda had once referred to it as a financial catastrophe, and this was what was left. This was my inheritance. A crumbling, useless outbuilding on land that wasn't even ours anymore. A worthless, forgotten stone box. Brenda hadn't been lying. It was, legally, all that was left. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips. It was the perfect final joke. She hadn't just kicked me out. She'd given me the keys to my own tomb. There was one name on the legal document, a witness signature I recognized. Arthur Abernathy, attorney at law. He was the lawyer who had handled my grandfather's estate, and later, my father's. I'd met him once, a tall, stooped man who looked like he was made of tweed and dust. He was the only official connection to my past I could think of. Using the last of my phone's battery, I found his office number online. A crisp receptionist put me on hold, the music a tinny version of some classical piece I didn't know. I expected to be told he was busy, to be deflected, to be passed off to a paralegal. But then his voice came on the line, dry and calm. Mr. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy, my name is Leo Vance, I said, my own voice sounding young and thin. My stepmother just gave me the deed to the old milk house, from my grandfather. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint rustle of papers on his end. Ah, yes, Leo. You're 18 today, then. Happy birthday. The sentiment was so incongruous with my situation that it almost made me laugh again. Thank you, I managed. I don't understand. What is this? Is it worth anything? Another pause. Worth anything, he repeated, his tone clinical. In monetary terms, son, no. It's a carved-out parcel, less than 1/10 of an acre, with a non-residential structure in a state of disrepair. The land around it was sold to a development corporation 12 years ago. Frankly, it's a liability. There are back taxes owed, though not a significant amount. Your grandfather was very specific in his will. It was to be held in trust and the deed transferred to you, and only you, on your 18th birthday. Your father couldn't touch it. His wife couldn't touch it. It's yours, for what it's worth. His words confirmed it. It was a joke, a burden, another weight to carry in a life that already felt too heavy. So what am I supposed to do with it? I asked, the desperation leaking into my voice. You could try to sell it to the adjoining landowners, the development company, he suggested, though without much conviction. They might offer you a pittance for it, just to consolidate the parcel, or you could go look at it. The key you have should fit the lock. It's your property, after all. He gave me the address, the name of the rural route in a town I'd never heard of, a place called Northwood, about a 3-hour bus ride away. He sounded like he was about to hang up, his duty discharged. Wait, I said, a little too loud. Mr. Abernathy, why? Why would he do this? Why leave me this? The line was quiet for a moment. I thought he'd hung up. Then he spoke. His voice a little softer, a little less like a lawyer. I don't know, son. Your grandfather was a complicated man. Proud. When he lost the farm, it broke him. Maybe this was all he had left to give. Or maybe, he added, a strange note of contemplation in his voice. He thought it was more than it looked. He wished me luck, and the line went dead. I sat there, the dead phone in my hand. I had $74, a backpack, and a key to a pile of rocks 3 hours away. A liability. A place with taxes due. And yet, it was mine. In a life where I had never owned anything, where I had always been a guest, a ward, a temporary resident, the word mine landed with a strange, solid weight. It was a terrible, pathetic, useless thing. But it was my terrible, pathetic, useless thing. I looked at the bus schedule printed on the side of the shelter. The next bus heading north would be there in 20 minutes. I stood up, slung the backpack over my shoulder, and left the empty cardboard box on the bench. I only kept the key and the deed. I didn't know what I was doing, or where I was going, really. I was just following the only thread I had. I was going to see what my grandfather had left me. I was going to see my inheritance. The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey out of the familiar world. The city's concrete and glass gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to strip malls, and finally, to wide-open country. The relentless gray sky had finally broken, and a fine, persistent mist slicked the windows, blurring the landscape into watercolor strokes of green and brown. I watched the towns go by, each one smaller and more worn down than the last. The other passengers were a quiet collection of the tired and the transient. An old woman with a worn floral bag, a young mother trying to quiet a restless baby, a man in a grease-stained work jacket who smelled of sawdust and coffee. No one looked at me. I was just another person in motion, heading somewhere or away from somewhere. My mind drifted. I tried to conjure a clear image of my grandfather, but all I got were fragments. The scratchy feel of his wool sweater against my cheek. The way he'd let me steer his old pickup truck while sitting on his lap, my hands too small to even grip the wheel. He'd seemed like a giant to me then, a man made of earth and patience. After he died, my father rarely spoke of him. When he did, it was with a complicated mix of resentment and grief. He lost everything, Dad would say, shaking his head. He was a good farmer, but a terrible businessman. Trusted the wrong people. Brenda, when she came into the picture, was even more dismissive. To her, my grandfather was just the architect of the debt that had shadowed my father's life. The reason they couldn't afford nicer things. The ghost that kept them tethered to a past of failure. I'd accepted their version of the story because it was the only one I had. My grandfather was a good man who made bad choices. A failure. And the milk house was the final, pathetic symbol of that failure. But Mr. Abernathy's words echoed in my head. Maybe he thought it was more than it looked. What could he have meant? Was it just a lawyer's attempt at a comforting platitude? Or did he know something? The bus lurched to a stop, its air brakes hissing. "Northwood," the driver called out, his voice flat. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, leaving me in a sudden, profound silence, broken only by the chirping of birds and the faint hum of a distant tractor. The town of Northwood wasn't much of a town at all. It was a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a buzzing neon sign that said, "Eat," a post office, and a handful of houses with peeling paint and tidy gardens. A single stoplight blinked from green to yellow to red, policing an intersection with no traffic. The air smelled of damp soil and cut grass. It was clean, so different from the city's exhaust-choked air. I asked the man behind the counter at the gas station for directions to the old Vance farmstead. He was old, his face a road map of wrinkles. He looked at me for a long moment. "Vance?" he said, his voice raspy. "Haven't heard that name in a long time. You must be Frank's boy." My father's name. "Yes," I said, surprised. "He was my father." The man nodded slowly. "I knew your granddad, Cal. He was a good man. A damn shame what happened to that farm." He gave me directions, pointing down a 2-lane road that disappeared between thick stands of trees. "It's a good 3-mile walk. The new owners put up a big fence. You can't miss it. Called Viridian Estates now, or some such nonsense." The walk was longer than I expected. The road was lined with fields, some fallow, some sprouting neat rows of green. The mist had stopped, and the sun was trying to burn through the clouds, casting the world in a soft, silvery light. My backpack felt heavier with each step. My $74 was now $62 after the bus ticket. I had no plan, If the milk house was uninhabitable, and it almost certainly was, I didn't know what I would do. Sleep outside? Try to find some under-the-table work in that tiny town. The sheer foolishness of my journey began to settle in my stomach like a cold stone. I was chasing a ghost, following a dead-end clue left by a man I barely knew. Then I saw it. The fence. It was exactly as the man had described it. A tall, black, wrought iron fence, severe and imposing. It looked completely out of place against the rolling hills. Behind it, in the distance, I could see a large, modern house, a monstrosity of glass and sharp angles. And next to the fence, almost swallowed by overgrown weeds and creeping vines, was a small, rusted gate. It was the old entrance. A weathered wooden sign lay on the ground, half buried in the mud. I could just make out the faded letters, Vance Farms. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. This was it. My property, my tenth of an acre of ruin, was on the other side of that gate. I pushed it. It shrieked in protest but swung open just enough for me to slip through. The change was immediate. Inside the gate, the world was wild. The grass was knee-high, tangled with wildflowers and thorns. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. I followed a barely there path, 2 ruts in the ground that must have been the old driveway. And then I saw it, about 50 yards in, nestled in a grove of overgrown lilac bushes. The milk house. It was smaller than I remembered, and more dilapidated. Built on a foundation of gray fieldstone, its wooden walls were the color of driftwood, and the roof sagged in the middle like a tired old man's spine. A shutter hung from a single hinge, knocking gently against the wall in the breeze. It looked exactly like Brenda had described it. Worthless. A forgotten relic. My grand inheritance. I walked up to the heavy wooden door, the iron key clutched in my hand. It felt cold and solid. I took a breath, pushed the key into the huge, rusty lock, and turned. The lock resisted for a moment, then gave way with a deep, groaning clunk that echoed in the quiet air. I put my shoulder to the door and pushed. It scraped against the stone floor, opening into a slice of darkness. A wave of air washed over me, cool and musty, carrying the scent of stone, dust, and something else. Something faintly sour and ancient, the ghost of spilled milk from a half-century ago. I stepped inside, my eyes struggling to adjust. The interior was a single, square room. Light filtered in through a grimy, cobweb-laced window on the far wall, illuminating a blizzard of dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were bare stone, to about waist height, then rough-sawn planks up to the rafters, where spiders had been very, very busy. A couple of rickety wooden shelves clung to one wall, empty except for a thick layer of grime. The floor was made of large, uneven flagstones. In the center of the room was a long, shallow trough, carved from a single massive piece of granite. This was where they would have set the milk cans, submerged in cold well water. I dropped my backpack on the floor. The sound was swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence. This was it. This was my sanctuary, my legacy. A cold, empty, crumbling box. Despair, sharp and sudden, washed over me. What had I been thinking? What fantasy had I been chasing? That there would be some hidden treasure? Some secret meaning? It was just an old shed. My grandfather hadn't left me a secret. He'd left me a piece of junk. A final, sad testament to his failure. I kicked at a loose stone on the floor, a surge of anger and disappointment making my eyes sting. It was a cruel joke. A cosmic punchline. Brenda was right. She had won. I sank down onto the edge of the stone trough, my head in my hands. The granite was cold and smooth beneath my fingers. I had nothing. I was in the middle of nowhere, with $62 and a property that was more of a burden than a blessing. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, the frantic beat of my own heart. I stayed like that for a long time, just sitting in the gloom, letting the full weight of my situation crush me. The sun must have been moving because the single beam of light from the window was slowly creeping across the floor. I watched it, mesmerized by the slow, inexorable passage of time. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and rot. Maybe I could clean the place up, just to have something to do, to fight back against the decay. It was a stupid thought, but it was better than nothing. I started with the shelves, pulling down thick, velvety curtains of cobwebs. I used my hands to wipe away layers of dust, revealing the pale, scarred wood underneath. Then I started on the floor. The flagstones were covered in dirt and leaves that had blown in under the door over the years. I swept them into a pile with a piece of broken board. As I cleared a patch near the wall, I noticed something. One of the flagstones wasn't sitting right. It was slightly raised, rocking a little when I put my weight on it. Curiosity, the last flicker of that stupid hope, stirred in me. I knelt down and worked my fingers into the crack around the edge. It was heavy, but it moved. I braced myself and lifted. The stone came up, revealing a dark, square hole beneath it. And nestled inside that hole was a dark, metal box. My breath caught in my throat. My heart started hammering against my ribs. A box. A hidden box. This was not nothing. This was something. My hands trembled as I reached into the hole and lifted it out. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, heavy and cold, painted olive drab. It was sealed shut, not with a lock, but with a thick layer of rust around the latch. I carried it over to the beam of light, my mind racing. What was inside? Money? Old papers? Something else entirely? I fumbled in my backpack for the small multi-tool I carried. Using the pliers, I gripped the rusted latch and began to work it back and forth. The metal groaned in protest. It was stiff, fused by decades of damp. I put all my strength into it, twisting and pulling until my knuckles were white. For a moment, I thought it was hopeless. Then, with a sudden sharp crack, the rust gave way and the latch sprang open. I paused, my hand hovering over the lid. This felt like a pivotal moment, a threshold. Whatever was in this box would change things. It had to. I took a deep, shuddering breath and lifted the lid. There was no treasure chest of gold coins. There was no weapon. The box was packed tight with papers, but on the very top was a single, thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a blob of dark red wax. My name, Leo, was written across the front in that same spidery handwriting from the deed. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound journal. My grandfather's journal. I carefully lifted the envelope out. The wax seal was brittle. I broke it with my thumb. Inside was a letter, several pages long, the paper thick and expensive feeling. I unfolded it, my hands shaking so much I could barely read the words. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means several things. It means I am long gone. It means you have turned 18. And it means you were clever enough, or perhaps just stubborn enough, to not dismiss this old place as worthless. I am proud of you for that already. I imagine you have many questions. I imagine you have been told a story about me, about the farm, about our family. A story of failure. I need you to know that story is not the truth. Or at least, it is not the whole truth." I had to stop and read that line again. It is not the whole truth. I sat down on the dusty floor, the letter shaking in my hands, and continued to read. "I did not lose the farm because I was a bad businessman, Leo. I lost it because I was robbed. Not at gunpoint, but with pens and contracts and smiling handshakes. A development company came to Northwood with big promises. They were represented by a man who called himself my partner. He offered to invest, to modernize, to help me expand. He said we were building a future. I was getting older. Your father showed no interest in farming, and I thought it was a way to secure this family's future. I trusted him. That was my mistake. My only real mistake. The documents I signed were not partnership agreements. They were a series of predatory loans, disguised in complex legal language I didn't understand. Each one was designed to fail, triggering clauses that increased my debt exponentially. By the time I realized what was happening, I was trapped. The debt was immense, insurmountable. They had me. They wanted the land, and they were willing to ruin me to get it. I was forced to sell. The company I had been partnering with bought the entire farm for a fraction of its worth, a price that just barely covered the fraudulent debt they themselves had created. It was all legal, all above board. I had signed the papers. I tried to fight it, but I had no resources, and they had a team of lawyers who ran circles around me. It broke my heart, Leo. Not just for the loss of the land, which had been in our family for 100 years, but for the shame of it. Your father saw it as a personal failure, and I was too proud and too beaten down to explain the complexities of the fraud. I let him believe I was a fool. It was easier than admitting I had been conned, that I had let a fox into our henhouse. I knew I was sick. The doctor had told me my heart was weak. I didn't have much time. And I knew I couldn't leave you any money directly. Your father was a good man, but weak-willed, and I knew his new wife, Brenda, would find a way to take it. She has a talent for that. So I came up with a plan, a desperate, long-shot plan. This milk house sits on a parcel that was deeded separately from the main farm, a historical anomaly from the 1800s. It was legally distinct. It was the only piece of this land I could save, the only thing I could protect. So I put it in a trust for you, with the strictest possible terms. It could not be sold or accessed by anyone until you turned 18. I made it look worthless. I knew Brenda would see it as junk, an insult, a burden to be discarded. I counted on her disdain. I used her own nature against her. This place, this worthless milk house, is not your inheritance, Leo. It is a key. It is the start of a path. The real inheritance is the truth. Inside this box, you will find my journal. In it, I documented everything. Every meeting, every conversation, every signature. I copied documents, I recorded license plates, I wrote down names. It is a complete record of the crime they committed. I could not get justice for myself, but the evidence remains. It has been waiting here, in the dark, for you. I don't know what kind of man you have grown into. I pray you are strong. I pray you are good. What you do with this information is up to you. But know this, you do not come from a line of failures. You come from a line of fighters. They beat me, but they did not break me. This letter, this box, this place, this is me fighting back from beyond the grave. The rest is up to you. Your loving grandfather, Cal. I finished the letter and the paper slipped from my fingers. I couldn't breathe. The air in the milk house was thick, heavy, charged with the weight of my grandfather's words. I sat there on the floor, the single beam of light now stretching across my lap, and I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never got to know, a proud, clever man who had been cheated and broken. I cried for my father, who had lived and died believing his own dad was a failure. I cried for the years I had spent believing it too, feeling the shame of it like a second-hand coat I couldn't take off. And I cried from a sudden, terrifying, and overwhelming surge of love for a man whose last act on earth was to build this elaborate, patient trap, not for revenge, but for truth. For me. The story of my past had been a lie, a simple, convenient lie that had shaped everything. And now, the truth was sitting in my lap. It felt heavier than any stone. When the tears finally subsided, a cold, hard anger began to settle in my gut. Viridian Estates. The man at the gas station had said the name with such contempt. The company with the sterile fence and the ugly modern house. They hadn't just bought a farm. They had stolen it. They had destroyed my family. I looked from the letter to the leather-bound journal still sitting in the metal box. An inheritance of truth. A record of a crime. He was right. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I had to stop for a moment, just to process. I leaned my head back against the cold stone of the trough, the dusty air filling my lungs. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything you thought you knew about your life, about your family, about your own story, was completely rewritten in an instant. When you realized a narrative of abandonment was actually a story of profound, complicated protection. It's a feeling that hollows you out and fills you up all at once. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had to dig through the past to find the truth, I want you to know that this community is a place for stories just like that. You're not alone in it. We're all just trying to piece together who we are. Now, let's get back to that journal. I still had no idea what I was supposed to do, but I knew I had to see this through. I had to know everything. I picked up the journal. The leather was soft and worn. It smelled of old paper and my grandfather's faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco. I opened it to the first page. The date was from 13 years ago, just before everything fell apart. The journal wasn't a diary of feelings. It was a log. Meticulous, detailed, and damning. My grandfather had a clear, strong hand. He wrote like an engineer, not a farmer. He noted the date and time of every meeting with the partner from the development company, a man named Marcus Thorne. He summarized their conversations, quoting Thorne's promises of profit sharing and investment. Then he'd written his own private notes in the margins. Thorne avoids specifics on ownership structure, pushes for quick signature, feels slick. Page after page, the narrative unfolded. I saw the copies of the loan agreements he'd taped into the book, the impossibly dense paragraphs of legalese highlighted in yellow. Next to them, my grandfather had written his layman's understanding of the terms, followed by a question mark. Says this is standard, a formality. Why is the interest rate variable based on market fluctuations he controls? He was documenting his own fleecing, piece by piece. He was building a case. As I read, my anger grew into a cold, steady fire. I saw the names of shell corporations, the flow of money through obscure accounts, the network of lies Thorne had built to isolate and bankrupt my grandfather. The journal was more than just a record of financial transactions. It was a portrait of a man fighting a battle he knew he was losing. There were entries where he described calling other farmers who had dealt with the same company, only to be met with silence or fear. There were notes about his attempts to find a lawyer who would take his case, but no one would go up against Thorne's powerful firm. He was alone, and he knew it. The final entries were heartbreaking. He wrote about the day he signed the farm over. There is no other way. The debt is a cancer. Selling is the only way to cut it out before it consumes everything and leaves your father with nothing but bills. Frank thinks I've failed him. Maybe I have. I failed to see the devil when he was smiling at me. I will carry that shame to my grave, but I will not carry it silently. That was the last entry about the farm. The final pages of the journal were different. They were plans, sketches of the milk house, notes on how to hide the box, a list of Mr. Abernathy's qualities. Honest, by the book, not a fighter, but will follow the law to the letter. He can be trusted to execute the will. He had planned it all. The trust, the key, the slow, patient wait for me to come of age. It was a strategy born of desperation and genius. He couldn't win the war, so he'd buried a map for his last surviving soldier, hoping that one day that soldier would be ready to fight. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The weight of it was immense. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was evidence. But what could I, an 18-year-old with $62, do with it? Go to the police? They'd see a teenager with a wild conspiracy theory. Go to the newspapers? They'd want more than an old man's diary. I felt a surge of helplessness that was almost as powerful as the anger. My grandfather had given me a weapon, but I had no idea how to wield it. These people, this Viridian Estates, had crushed a man like him. What chance did I have? I felt small and powerless all over again, the fury of the last hour draining away, leaving behind a hollow fear. I curled up on the dusty floor, clutching the journal to my chest, and for the first time since Brenda closed the door on me, I felt truly, completely alone. I was a boy holding a ghost's testimony, and I was terrified. After a long while, I sat up. The light in the room had shifted again, now a soft, golden orange as the afternoon began to fade. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't just give up. That would be the real failure. It would mean that my grandfather's last, desperate act of love and defiance was for nothing. I had to look again. I had to believe he had given me more. I picked up his first letter, my eyes scanning the pages, searching for something I might have missed. Nothing. It was all about the journal. Then my eyes fell on the last line. The rest is up to you. But was it? Was this really all he had left me? A story and a fight I couldn't possibly win? My gaze drifted from the letter to the journal and then back into the now empty metal box. And then I remembered something else. A detail from the journal. In his notes about hiding the box, he'd written a short, cryptic phrase. The foundation is sound. Where the milk cooled, the future is seated. Where the milk cooled. I looked at the massive stone trough in the center of the room. The place where the cold water had sat, cooling the milk cans. The place I was leaning against. My heart began to pound again, a slow, heavy drumbeat. The future is seated. I ran my hands along the inside of the trough. The stone was smooth, worn down by decades of water and metal. It seemed like a single, solid piece of granite, but as I felt along the bottom, my fingers brushed against a faint, straight line. A seam. It was almost invisible, perfectly cut. It wasn't a crack, it was a joint, a false bottom. I pressed on one side of it, nothing. I tried to pry it up with my fingers, but the fit was too perfect. I grabbed the tire iron from my backpack's side pocket, the one I kept for emergencies. I wedged the thin end into the hairline crack and pushed down. The stone slab tilted upwards with a low, grating sound of rock on rock. It was heavy, a thick piece of slate cut to look like the bottom of the trough. Beneath it was another hollowed-out space, and in that space sat another metal box. This one was different. It was smaller, but heavier. A commercial fireproof lockbox, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. It wasn't locked. I lifted it out, my arms straining. It was heavy, really heavy. I set it on the floor, and with trembling fingers, I unlatched the lid. I lifted it, and I forgot how to breathe. It was full of money. Cash. Stacks of $100 bills neatly bundled in paper bands. I reached in and lifted one out. It was real. I'd never seen so much money in my life. I started pulling the stacks out, laying them on the dusty floor. $10,000 per stack. There were 5 of them. $50,000. It was an impossible sum. A fortune. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money, there was one more envelope. Just one. I picked it up. It felt different from the first letter. The paper was thinner, the envelope less formal. I opened it. The note inside was short, the handwriting a little shakier, as if written with great effort. Leo, it said, this is your choice. This money is your freedom. It's every last cent I managed to hide away. Take it, disappear. Go to college, start a business, build a life for yourself far away from here. No one would ever blame you. The world is a hard place, and you owe it nothing. You don't owe me anything either. My fight does not have to be your fight. This is your escape hatch, your second chance. Or, You can stay. You can use this money to finish what I started. You can use it to hire a real lawyer, a shark. The evidence is in the journal. The resources are in this box. The choice is yours, son. A new life or justice for the old one. I trust you, whatever you decide. I love you, Cal. I stared at the note, then at the stacks of cash spread out on the floor. $50,000. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I could walk out of this dusty milk house and never look back. I could get an apartment, a car. I could go to community college. I could be a normal person. The thought was intoxicating. All I had to do was take the money and forget. Forget the journal. Forget Marcus Thorne. Forget the stolen farm and the broken old man who had died fighting for it. I could be safe. I could be free. I looked around the small, dark room. I saw the beam of light, now a deep, burnished gold. I saw the dust motes dancing. I felt the cold stone beneath me. This whole place was a testament to one man's refusal to be forgotten. He had given me an out. A loving, generous, guilt-free exit. He trusted me. And in that moment, the choice became startlingly, painfully clear. To take the money and run would be to prove Brenda and everyone else right. That the Vances were quitters. That our legacy was one of failure and retreat. But to stay and fight was to claim my real inheritance. It wasn't the farm, and it wasn't the money. It was the name. It was the story. I looked at the $50,000, not as an escape, but as an arsenal. I looked at the journal, not as a burden, but as a weapon. My grandfather had given me a choice between freedom and justice, but I realized they were the same thing. My freedom wasn't in running away. It was in standing my ground. Right here. On the only piece of land I had ever called my own. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a grim, determined smile. Okay, Grandpa, I thought. Let's go to war. I packed everything carefully. The journal and the letters went back into the first ammunition can. The money went into my backpack, the weight of it a shocking, reassuring pressure against my spine. I closed the false bottom of the trough, slid the flagstone back over the first hiding spot. I left the milk house looking exactly as I had found it, a worthless, empty shed. I locked the heavy door behind me, the clunk of the bolt sounding final and satisfying. Standing outside, I took a long look at the ugly, modern house on the hill, its windows glinting in the setting sun. They thought they had won. They thought the story was over, the old farmer dead and buried, his family scattered and broken. They had no idea that right here, on this forgotten patch of weeds, the story was just beginning. I walked back to town, my stride confident, my purpose clear. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a hot, righteous anger. I spent a little of the money on a room for the night at a tiny motel next to the diner, and had the first real meal I'd eaten all day. The next morning, I caught the first bus back to the city. During the ride, I didn't look out the window. I sat with my backpack on my lap, and I made a plan. When I got back to the city, I didn't go looking for an apartment. I went straight to a bank and deposited $49,000 into a new account. Then I walked to a public library, used their computer to do some research, and made a phone call. Not to Mr. Abernathy. My grandfather had said to hire a shark, and Abernathy was a good man, but he was a guppy. I needed a great white. I found her in a high-rise office building downtown. Her name was Eleanor Vance. No relation, just a coincidence I took as a good sign. Her firm specialized in corporate fraud and real estate litigation. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, an impeccably tailored suit, and an aura of intelligence so intense it was almost physically palpable. I had to pay $1,000 just for the consultation, a fee that would have been my entire net worth 2 days ago. I walked into her glass-walled office, sat down, and placed the olive-drab ammunition can on her polished mahogany desk. "My name is Leo Vance," I said, my voice steady, "and I'd like to hire you to destroy a company called Viridian Estates." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That's a bold opening statement, Mr. Vance. On what grounds?" I opened the can and took out my grandfather's journal. I opened it to the first page and pushed it across the desk toward her. "On the grounds of this," I said. "It's the story of how they stole my family's farm." For the next hour, she didn't speak, she just read. She turned the pages with a lawyer's precision, her expression unreadable. She examined the taped-in documents, her eyes scanning the fine print. When she was done, she closed the journal and looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time. "This is an extraordinary document," she said, her voice quiet. "It's a prosecutor's roadmap. But it's from 12 years ago. The statute of limitations on most civil fraud claims has likely expired." My heart sank. "So, there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that," she corrected me, a flicker of a smile on her lips. "Civil claims may be difficult, but racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, those have longer statutes and more severe penalties. This Marcus Thorne your grandfather writes about. If he established a pattern of this kind of activity, we might be able to make a case under RICO statutes." She saw the confusion on my face. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's the legal equivalent of a sledgehammer. "Tell me, Mr. Vance, do you have the resources for a fight like this?" "It won't be cheap." I met her gaze without flinching. "I have $49,000. And this." I pushed the journal an inch further toward her. "My grandfather's last words to me were to hire a shark. I hope I found her." Her smile widened. "Mr. Vance," she said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe you have. Let's go hunting." The months that followed were a blur of legal education. Eleanor, she insisted I call her Eleanor, and her team of young, hungry associates descended on my grandfather's journal like scholars on a sacred text. They cross-referenced names, dug into corporate filings, and subpoenaed bank records. What they found was that my grandfather hadn't been Thorne's only victim. He had run the same scam on at least 4 other family farms in the region, using the same predatory loan structures and shell corporations. He was a serial predator who had gotten rich by destroying families. The first shot was a letter of intent to sue, sent to the CEO of Viridian Estates. Their response was swift and dismissive. A letter from their high-priced law firm basically telling us to get lost. The second shot was the lawsuit itself. A document over 100 pages long, detailing the entire conspiracy and naming Marcus Thorne and his associates personally. That got their attention. Their lawyers called Eleanor. They were still arrogant, but now there was a nervous edge to their tone. They made an offer. A nuisance settlement. $75,000 to make me go away. Eleanor called me into her office to discuss it. "It's a lowball offer," she said, "but it's money on the table. It would give you a clean start, no more fighting." I thought about my grandfather's second letter. The choice between freedom and justice. "No," I said, without hesitation. "Tell them we'll see them in court." Eleanor grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The fight escalated. They filed motions to dismiss. We filed counter-motions. There were depositions. I had to sit in a conference room while a team of slick, expensive lawyers tried to pick apart my story, my grandfather's journal, my own credibility. They tried to paint my grandfather as senile, as incompetent. They tried to paint me as a greedy, opportunistic kid. But I just held on to the truth. I had the journal. I had the facts. And with every question they asked, I just grew more determined. During a break in one deposition, Marcus Thorne himself approached me in the hallway. He was older now, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, but he had the same predatory smile my grandfather had described. "Kid," he said, his voice low and confidential. "You're in over your head. Take the money. We'll make it 200,000. Buy yourself a nice car, go to college. Forget about all this." He was offering me a fortune. He was offering me the easy way out. I just looked at him. "My grandfather trusted you," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely control. "And you destroyed him. There is no amount of money that will make me forget that." I walked away, leaving him standing there in the hallway. The turning point came when Eleanor's investigators found a former bookkeeper for one of Thorne's shell corporations. She was terrified, but her conscience had been eating at her for years. Armed with the corroborating details from my grandfather's journal, Eleanor's team was able to convince her to talk. Her testimony, combined with the journal, was the smoking gun. It proved a deliberate, criminal conspiracy. Faced with the threat of a federal racketeering investigation and the potential for prison time, Viridian Estates finally broke. Their lawyers called, their tone no longer arrogant, but desperate. They wanted to settle, and this time, they weren't talking about nuisance money. The final settlement was staggering. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, where the bad guys went to jail in handcuffs. The world rarely works that way. They were too rich, too well connected for that. But they were forced to pay a massive financial penalty, a sum with 7 figures that was distributed among the 4 families they had defrauded, including mine. They were forced to issue a public statement admitting to predatory and unethical business practices in their acquisition of the farms. And there was one more condition, a non-negotiable demand I had made through Eleanor. They had to sign the deed for the original Vance farmhouse, and the 10 acres immediately surrounding it, back over to me, free and clear. 6 months after I first walked into her office, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's house. My house. It was run down, the paint peeling, the windows clouded with dust. But it was solid. It was real. And it was mine. 100 yards away, I could see the little stone milk house, standing sturdy and quiet in its grove of lilacs. It looked different to me now. Not a tomb, but a cradle. Not an ending, but a beginning. The legal battle was over. The money was in the bank. But the real victory was this, standing here, reclaiming the story. I spent the next year bringing the place back to life. I used the settlement money to hire local contractors, many of whom remembered my grandfather and were happy for the work. We put on a new roof, replaced the windows, sanded the floors, and painted the walls. I learned how to fix plumbing, how to run wiring, how to garden. The work was hard, but it was honest. It felt good to build something with my own hands. The people in Northwood, who had first looked at me with suspicion, slowly started to accept me. The old man from the gas station would drop by with advice. The woman from the diner would bring me pies. They told me stories about my grandfather, filling in the gaps in my memory. They told me he would be proud. One afternoon, Mr. Abernathy came to visit. He looked around the restored farmhouse, a look of quiet amazement on his face. "I have to admit, Leo," he said, shaking his head, "I never would have believed it. Your grandfather, he actually did it. He won." "We won," I corrected him. We stood on the porch, looking out over the fields. The ugly iron fence of Viridian Estates was still there in the distance, but it didn't seem so menacing anymore. It was just a line on a map. It had no power over me. "He left you a choice," Abernathy said thoughtfully. "Freedom or justice. It seems you managed to get both." I nodded, looking over at the milk house. "He left me something more important," I said. "He left me a home." And that's the real lesson here, isn't it? Home isn't just a building. It's not just a plot of land. It's a story that you belong to. It's a past you can stand on, and a future you can build. My stepmother thought she was throwing me away with the trash of the past. She thought she was handing me a symbol of failure. But what she really gave me was a key to the truth, a key to my own strength. She gave me the one thing that could save me. Maybe you've been in a situation like that. Maybe you felt written off, discarded, left with something that the world told you was worthless. But you found the value in it. You found the story inside. That's the kind of resilience I want to celebrate with this channel. Your story matters. Your fight matters. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in the power of truth and the promise of a second chance, please click that subscribe button and become a part of this community we're building. And I want you to go down to the comments and tell me something. What is one worthless thing that someone gave you or that you held on to that turned out to mean everything? It could be a piece of advice, a tattered photograph, or a key to an old, forgotten building. I'll be reading every single one of your comments, because we are all, in our own way, just trying to find the key to the place where we belong. We're all just trying to find our way home.